Hello and welcome to this webinar on the latest version of Euclid 6. I'm François Le Goff, working at the European Chemicals Agency in the Euclid team, and together with my colleague, we will go through the latest features and improvements introduced in this Euclid 6 version 4.2.1 release. Today you can connect to the audio of this webinar only using your computer, so phone connection is not allowed, and verify that your sound volume is correctly set on your computer to follow this webinar correctly. We will be using also the Q&A panel of the WebEx application. You can post your questions during the entire webinar, and before the Q&A session at the end of this webinar, we'll leave you 5 minutes to send additional questions. The Q&A panel is on the right side of your screen, and you can send your questions to all panelists. Today we have a number of panelists that will answer your questions during the entire webinar. We have Anna, Askar, Daria, Eduardo, Robin, Severin, Tommy, and Zolt. They will answer during the webinar and at the end as well. Questions will be answered privately, so you will not see each other's questions and answers. We will keep all your questions anonymous, and at the end of the webinar, we will answer the most frequently asked questions. After the meeting, we will publish all the materials for this webinar on the Euclid 6 website. You have the link here. We have split the information on the website between webinars and video tutorials. So now please note that there is a new URL to access the webinars information. We will post the recording, the presentation, the question and answers as a written document as well. Now the agenda for today. I will start with an overview of the Euclid 6.4 release and some information on the format update that we did in this new version. Then my colleague Mark Roberts will present the Euclid web user interface and the plans for replacing the classic interface of Euclid. Now, as I said already, we will finish the webinar with a question and answer session where all participants can pose their questions, and I will answer the most frequently asked questions. Let's start with the Euclid 6.4 release. We had announced the release on the 21st of October via a news alert posted on our website. And we published also another news alert just on the day of the release on the 30th of October, so Wednesday last week. If you did not receive a notification about this release, you can go to the Euclid website and access your account. You can set a subscription to receive the news alerts via emails. Together with the Euclid 6.4 release, we have updated the license agreement. So there is no big changes. We just made it more open to cover not only Euclid, but Euclid-related tools. For example, the provider agent to communicate with the ECAM portal, and other tools that we will communicate about in the next weeks. Then it covers also the use of Euclid 6 under different legislations. Previously, it was references were made to REACH and CLP. Now the license agreement is more generic and covers the use of Euclid under different legislations. You can download the end user license agreement if you want to read it on the Euclid 6 website, and you have to approve it also each time you download something from the Euclid 6 website. As in the past releases, we have still different distributions of Euclid, a desktop version that you install on your own computer, a server installation that can be accessed and shared by multiple users, and we have also our ECA cloud services that can be used for REACH and CLP users. Some information specifically for the cloud users. The cloud instances were updated to version 4.2.0 within 2 days of the release. So this happened already last week. If you are a Euclid Cloud user, you will notice that you have access to the latest version. Latest version, not exactly, because for technical reasons, we had to deploy first version 4.2.0, and version 4.2.1 will be deployed early next week. There are only minor changes between these two versions. For example, fixes to some dynamic content in web forms that we will explain a bit later in this presentation. And again, all REACH and CLP users can subscribe to have access to the latest version of Euclid and to benefits from the upgrade made by ECA services. Some statistics now for the Euclid 6.4 release and the number of Euclid users. We count between 200 and 300 new users of Euclid registering on our Euclid websites every month. This is always the type of the number of users we get regularly. We noted also 400 downloads of the latest version of Euclid 1 week following the release. In total, also in our ECA Cloud services, we are providing more than 2,000 Euclid instances to REACH and CLP users. So it gives you an idea of the number of Euclid users and the size of the Euclid community. So let's move on to the Euclid format. As every October, every year, we introduce updates of the format in this Euclid release. So I will go through, in this part of the presentation, the list of changes that were made in this version. And I'll start with some highlights. So in total, there were more than 50 different topics we addressed in this version, where we introduced format changes. And the main changes are coming from updates to the OECD harmonized templates, which are used to report summaries of studies that are performed according to the OECD test guidelines. We also took into account updates to the globally harmonized system at the United Nations level, revision 6 and 7. And we also included updates in relation to the latest version of the CLP Regulation in Europe, and we covered the latest adaptations to Technical Progress 10 to 14. We continued also our format changes to support members of the OECD Euclid user group, and we work together with regulatory organizations in Australia and New Zealand, and of course in ECA to introduce new changes to the format. We took also into account the latest update of the REACH annexes concerning nanomaterials, and we also prepared Euclid for a pilot we are performing with EFSA on the potential use of Euclid for EU plant protection product and active substance. We also prepared Euclid to, in the future, support the ECA database on substances of concern in articles in relation to the Waste Framework Directive update. You can see on the right side that the Euclid format is organized in different modules. We have the main part of the format that is harmonized at an OECD or at an European level. And then we have some specific part of the format which are related to regulations. In Europe, it's REACH, CLP, biocides, SCIP, which is the new database for articles, and plant protection products, which are has been created in this new version in order to prepare for a pilot we do with EFSA. And then we have also specific elements of the format for Australia and for New Zealand organizations. In the next slides, I will go through in more details inside each of these modules and highlight the main changes, but you will see that on the slides, I try to list also exhaustively all the changes we did for you to be aware and to come back to us if you need more information about the one specific change we did. First, the OECD harmonized templates. The main thing is that we have created a new template for together with the OECD for storing data collected during the execution of studies for the dispersion stability of nanomaterials. And we have updated existing templates for physical properties, for example, biodegradation in water screening tests. We also updated some ecotoxicological and toxicological templates, but these were minor changes that were made in order to maintain these templates and make them still compatible with the latest version of the test guidelines at the OECD level. I continue also with the remaining harmonized templates. We did some minor updates to um, uh, harmonized templates storing information on pesticides, for example, the residue chemistry. We slightly adapted the efficacy templates and some use and exposure information, as well as the monitoring data. Another part of the Euclid format that is harmonized consists in all the what we call entities, where we store information on test material, contact information, high-level information on mixture, substance, and annotations. And here again, some minor changes were made. Maybe one change to note here is the introduction of new fields in the reference substance to store structure information. In the backend of Euclid, we also introduced a new entity or a new form to collect article information. And although this is not visible for users via the user interface of Euclid, it's already released with the Euclid 6.4 at the format level. And this was done in order to prepare for the future ECHA database on substances of concerns in article. Other changes made to Euclid harmonized documents. I mentioned already the updates of the GHS document, which is used to report classification labeling information. The main changes are listed here. I can note, for example, the new reason for no classification, new flammable gases categories, or new hazard statement codes that were inserted in this release. We also updated the composition information for substances and the analytical information in order to cover the nanomaterials requirements introduced by the update of REACH. Specifically on these requirements for reporting nanoforms in Euclid 6.4, they are coming from the update of REACH Annex 6, where nanoforms characterizers have been introduced. And at the same time, we have adapted the completeness check rules in order to make sure that the required information are provided for nanomaterials. The dissemination has also been updated to define what information on nanoforms can be made publicly available on our website. And my colleagues have updated the registration manual to explain all these nanoforms changes in a specific annex. There is one thing to note for Euclid users who are registering substances to ECHA. In section 1.2 composition, the state form of the substance is now mandatory in order to make sure that the specific requirements for nanoforms can be checked in these dossiers. There will be next week, on the 12th of November, a specific webinar dedicated to these rich information requirements for nanoforms. So if you want to learn more, you can register to this webinar already today. I continue with the list of changes made to Euclid harmonized documents. These are minor changes again done in a set of documents going from the summary of toxicological information, where we clarified some labels, or in the guidance on safe use, for example. After these harmonized documents, I go to specific templates in Euclid that are introduced to support specific regulatory requirements. And I'll start with the REACH regulation. For application for authorization of uses, we have created new fields to store information on the scale of use and the number of sites for the uses for which an authorization is required. We have also updated the use of the phase-in scheme. When you submit a registration dossier, now you don't have to specify in all cases phase-in or non-phase-in. You can also leave this field as with the default selection. And this is due to the fact that the phase-in scheme is ending and other provisions are entering into force. We also clarified slightly some labels in dossier headers for intermediate uses to clarify a bit the purpose of some fields. The main changes done for the CLP regulation, apart from the changes I already mentioned in the GHS document to cover the latest updates of this regulation, we have also made some changes related to the poison centers notifications, and they are presented here. Mainly clarification in the dossier header to clarify the purpose of the notification, but we also slightly updated the product information and the SDS information for mixtures. Let's move on to the requirements specific to biocides in Europe. There we have introduced a new document to report information on the degree of dissolution and dilution stability. And we have updated a series of documents to, for example, facilitate the import of SPC, a summary of product characteristics, from the XML files that are generated with the SPC editor to a EUCLID dossier. As I said previously, we have updated the format of EUCLID in order to prepare for the future database on articles containing substance of concern. And this is a change that you cannot see yet in EUCLID, but will be visible in the user interface in the coming month. And we have also prepared a new submission type and dossier header to prepare notifications to this future database. But again, these changes are not visible to users. We did only the preparatory work at the format level of EUCLID. If you want to know more about this SCIP database and the submission of information on articles, there is a workshop organized on 12th of November. You can find more information on our website, and you can also watch live this workshop next week. I mentioned as well that EUCLID was adapted already last year for the purpose of the Australia Regulatory Agency in NICNAS. And this year we have continued the update together with them, and they have finalized their submission types and their dossier content for certificate application. And if you want to have more information, you can consult their website. In EUCLID 6.4, we have been working with New Zealand regulatory authorities as well to start preparing EUCLID for their needs. This includes the inclusion of the specific classification labeling information in New Zealand, hazardous substances controls, and some information on uses for pesticides and veterinary products, and also generic uses for substances. An exhaustive set of documentation is available on the EUCLID website under the format page. What you find there is a full set of documentation, including the schema files for the XML. So this is the technical information that developers, for example, would need in case they would like to work with the EUCLID format. For the end users, we have also a Word representation of the format with the list of fields and the content of the EUCLID forms. We have an Excel file containing all the EUCLID fields. And we have also an Excel file listing all the changes that were made in EUCLID 6.4 in comparison with EUCLID 6.3. So once you have the presentation of this webinar, you can go through the high-level list of changes, and for more details, open this Excel file to see what exactly has changed in each document. What is new and what has been published on our website for this release is a set of migration rules in XML format. This is for developers to, for example, migrate information from EUCLID 6.3 and 6.4 if they are not using EUCLID. And it contains also some dynamic content rules specifications in XML format. And we will see in the next presentation by my colleague Mark how these dynamic content rules have been implemented in the web interface of EUCLID. You see here on the screenshot of the page that is published on the website that we have added a link to the specific format package for the poison centers notifications. And there is also a link to download the specific format relevant to SCIP notifications for the new database on substance of concern in articles. One slide to finish this part on the format changes. I wanted to talk about the compatibility. Now it has been several years where the same compatibility is established between Euclid 6 versions. The forward compatibility is always supported, which means that all Euclid files can be read by the latest version of Euclid. And in terms of backward compatibility, we continue to offer the compatibility between the latest version and the previous one, which means that Euclid 6.4 users can exchange files with Euclid 6.3 users. And we don't go back to Euclid 6.2, so that's why we recommend Euclid 6.2 users to upgrade to 6.4 to make sure that there is no disruption in the exchange of information in the exchange of Euclid files. Submission to ECA can be made with any Euclid 6 version. One exception is if you report information on nanomaterials under the REACH regulation, then you have to use Euclid 6.4 because, as I mentioned, it contains the new requirements for this type of substances. I will hand over the presentation to my colleague Mark Roberts, who will present the changes in the web user interface.
Thank you, Francois. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Roberts. I work in the Euclid team here in the European Chemicals Agency, and I would like to take you through what's new in Euclid 6.4. So firstly, we now have in the web interface advanced settings, so you can export your dataset or template with these advanced settings. The main point of the advanced settings is so that you can include or exclude data from your export. There's also a specific selection, which I've noted here, where you can export your dataset or template in a format compatible with the previous version of Euclid. So for 6.4, this means that you can export your dataset in a format compatible with 6.3. Just to remind you of what thing or what data you can include or exclude from an export, because this may be new to you if you're new to the web interface. You can include or exclude detail fields from the export. These are usually found in the endpoint study records. You can identify these fields. They normally have the word details in the field label. So here I've got an example, details on analytical methods in the hydrolysis document. You can also include or exclude fields with the label confidential. Here's an example from an OHT, such as specific details on test material used for the study confidential. You can choose to include or exclude confidentiality or regulatory program flags as well. Annotations, attachments, both inside the document as part of the metadata of the document, as well as the modification history. And likewise, we've also now have the advanced settings when you print to PDF for datasets, dossiers, and templates. This is also available when you're printing directly from a section document, such as hydrolysis or repeated dose toxicity, etc. Again, the main point of these advanced settings is to include or exclude data. This is a little different from the export. So when you're printing PDF, you can choose to include or exclude a cover page, annotations, a legal entity, and again, the detail fields, the fields marked with confidential, as well as the confidential and regulatory program flags. We also have further advanced settings implemented in the web UI for this Euclid 6.4 release. You can choose to include or exclude specific documents when creating a dossier, when printing to PDF, and when exporting your dataset or template. Note that this is available only for datasets and templates when you're printing or exporting, and in future we'll expand this to dossiers too. As you can see in the screenshot there, it's quite a simple layout. You have the tree structure of your dataset, and you can simply navigate through the different sections and include or exclude documents you want to be part of the dossier creation or the print or the export. On the left-hand side is a flat list of all the entities that are part of your dataset. This includes not only the top-level substance, but all the referenced entities you have as part of that substance. So, for instance, reference materials, test material information, etc. I will leave it there. You can also now in this version of Euclid 6.4 access the logs. When you have an error during import or export, you can access the log to give you an indication about the reason for the failure. So for instance, in this example here, I've tried to import a dossier, but it already exists in my database, so I can't import it, and there's been an error. And in the text file, it's been quite clearly stated there the reason why. We also have for Euclid 6.4 template management. This was already existing in the classic interface, but now it's fully implemented in the web interface. This means that you can fully manage your templates using the web interface, which means that you can create templates, edit templates, delete or export templates. You can search for the templates you have by the template name, as well as print these templates. Just a reminder of what the template concept is. This supports the reuse of Euclid data between substances and mixtures. And templates can be used in two ways. The first way is as a read-only source of data, which is referenced by other substances and mixtures. And secondly, as a set of data to copy over into other substances or mixtures. When you inherit, you cannot edit that information in the substance you're using the template data in. And when you go into a substance or mixture and you see that you have a template linked there, you'll see it directly under the header templates. In this version of Euclid 6.4, you can also review categories as part of a substance dossier. In the substance dossier, you will see under the categories header the name of the category that substance belongs to. If you open the category, you will see then what we call the category object, which is a set of information describing the category. You can then also, as in the screenshot there, actually go into the different substances which are members of that category, and actually open those substances directly from a sliding window. You can do this by selecting Open Component or Go to Source. If you open Component, this will take you to Substance Section 1.1. If you open the source, this will take you to the table of contents for that substance. And as a quick note, during the dossier creation in the web interface, if your substance is part of a category and you create a dossier from that substance, the dossier will contain not only the category, but all the substance members which are part of that category. And this is following the default settings that are currently set using the classic interface. In Euclid 6.4, we have also provided for you the modification history. So for substances, if you go to section 1.1, you'll be able to see the full modification history of that substance. This includes, for instance, the import event, the modifications on the dataset, the creation of a document, and the deletion of a document. If you want to see each document in turn, what's happened or what has been modified in that document, you can go into a specific document like the acute toxicity and check the modification history there. In the screenshot, I show how to access the modification history. If you hover over the button, you'll see Open Modification History. You can identify the change through two key identifiers. One is the modification date itself, and the other is the user who made the modification, as in the screenshot there. In Euclid 6.4, we have also redesigned the table view so that when there is tabular views of information, you will now see these as a table, so you can compare and analyze the information more easily. So for instance, in section 1.2, the substance composition, the characterization of nanoforms can now be entered in a tabular format. You just simply add a new item if you want to add a new row in the table. If you want to edit information within the table, you just hover over the row, which will be then highlighted, and when clicking, you'll get a sliding window in which you can enter the information. We have also in Euclid 6.4 implemented a redesigned flag view in the document so that you can see more clearly what you have flagged as confidential or flagged as belonging to a particular regulatory program. So for instance, in the endpoint study records, in the administrative data, there's a generic flag that's always at the top of the document. Here in the view, I have selected that no PA is my confidentiality, and I put some regulatory program flags there too. And by clicking on the flag, you can then edit what information is shown there. We have also redesigned the substance and mixture lists, so there's a clear differentiation between your datasets and dossiers. As you can see in the screenshot there, if I select dataset, I get to see all the datasets, and if I select dossiers, I see all the dossiers which I've created from those datasets. We've also implemented some color differentiation to help you distinguish between the two. So if you select the datasets view, these will be highlighted in an orange-red color, and if you select dossiers, these will be highlighted in a purple color. We have also implemented in the web user interface the so-called dynamic content rules. These were already implemented in the classic interface, and now they're available in the web interface. Just a reminder, these content rules disable or hide certain fields, blocks of fields, or pick list values within the same document. And I'd like to take you through a few of these examples to remind you in case you're not familiar with this. So as a first example, you can disable, there's a field that is disabled based on selection in another field. In this example, the field number of fragments is disabled due to the selection in the field parameter. In the second example, we're hiding a block of fields, and in the example, it's showing the characterization of nanoforms in section 1.2 of Euclid. And here, only if the solid nanoform value is selected in the state form is the block of fields for nanoforms enabled for you. And as a third example, based on the selection made in the field, in this example, type of information, various pick list values are deselected. So in this example, we've selected the experimental study as a type of information, and consequently, any results deriving from QSARs are disabled in the rationale for reliability, including deficiencies. If you have information or data in a document which is not valid and is not conforming to the dynamic content rule, you will receive a warning message. I've got a couple of examples here based on the previous ones. So for instance, if you have data entered in the number of fragments, which is not supposed to be there, you will receive a warning that this should be empty. And in the second example there, if I've selected a rationale which is not valid, I will have a message telling me that this is an invalid entry. So those are the key highlights from this version of Euclid 6.4. And I would like to actually move on to the plans we have for the rest of 2019 and 2020. So in the web interface, we still need to implement the rest of the inventory management. And this includes what we call the simple entities, such as reference substances, test materials, legal entities. So you can manage these entities abstractly in your database, and you don't need then to manage them in line when you're actually creating or editing documents. One particular feature of these entities which need to be implemented is the export of these entities. Currently, only reference substances can be managed, but these cannot be exported. You'll be able also next year to manage category objects in Euclid in the web interface. This is something that is replicating what is currently in the classic interface. We will also extend the Euclid search capabilities in the web interface. We're working closely with industry and MSCAs to ensure that we identify the key search criteria when searching for substances and mixtures, when searching for documents, or when searching for these simple entities such as reference substance, test material. We will also improve the navigation in Euclid so that the table of contents can be better understood. This is particularly bearing in mind future adaptations, well, the current adaptation is 6.4 to these different regulations. So for instance, for the SCIP database. We will also implement the section navigation within the document so that you can easily navigate from section to section when in a document. Continuing the navigation improvements which we plan to make, we hope to implement what we call the inbound and outbound references within Euclid. This means that you can easily navigate from, for instance, a reference substance to the documents or substances for which that reference substance is linked to. This currently exists in the classic interface. I have a screenshot there, and we hope to implement something similar in the web interface. We will also implement the user management in the web interface. This means that you'll be able to manage users' roles and groups. We'll also implement the advanced calculation tools, the DNL and PNet calculators, the derived no effect level and predicted no effect concentration level calculators. And we will continue to analyze where possible and improve the performance of the web interface. Hopefully you will notice in this release some improvements to the performance, such as when searching and listing your substances and when going into a document from a data set. And finally, for a key highlight coming up in the web interface is a new GHS Document View. This will simplify and give you a more user-friendly view of your classification and labeling information. We will also implement a wizard-like classification and labeling selector, and this will assist you in building your classification categories and associated hazard statements. In the mock-up there, for instance, you can start typing in a hazard category, and this will pair for you the relevant hazard statements automatically. You will also be able to calculate your labeling based on the CLP information you provided earlier. And these mock-ups, as a quick disclaimer, may not be fully reflecting what is implemented, but gives you an idea about what will be implemented. So I'd like to move on now finally to the issue of replacing the classic interface. Last year, we had hoped that by this time, this year, we would have been able to phase out the classic interface, but based on feedback from industry, regulatory authorities, and internally here within ECHA, it's obvious that we can't do this yet. But this is still our plan to replace the classic interface with the web interface, and we hope that this will happen by October next year for the next major release of Euclid 6.5. As I mentioned before, we have opened many communication channels with our stakeholders, so we will continue to monitor the use of the web interface and to ensure that it's up to standard so that it can replace the classic interface. And we would encourage all Euclid users to start using the web interface as soon as possible if you haven't already, so that you can become familiar with it. And I'd like to now move on to the Q&A session. We'll give you 5 minutes to ask some more questions, and then my colleague Francois will come back and answer some of the key questions you've been asking. So thank you.
Thank you for sending your questions during the Q&A session. My colleagues are answering them directly. And in this last part of the webinar, I will address the most frequently asked questions. At the end of the webinar, you will have also the possibility to look at a written version of all the questions and answers addressed during this webinar. This will be accessible from the Euclid 6 website. Before I start going through the question and answers, I wanted to mention the existence of a LinkedIn group that you can use in order to receive more information about Euclid related news. You can request to join if you have a LinkedIn account, and we use this group in order to give you the opportunity to send questions before this webinar. And we have received some of the questions identified in this slide here. The question on the backwards migration to version 6.3 was already answered during the webinar, during my presentation and Mark's presentation. We confirmed today that Euclid 6.4 can still be compatible with Euclid 6.3 by using this export to previous major version. And this is something we will continue also in the future. So next year, for each major update of Euclid in October, we will make sure that migration is possible to the previous version of Euclid. Today, we also went through the future of the classic interface. Since last year, you have the possibility in all Euclid distribution to access the classic interface and the web interface. And we will continue this approach at least until October next year, when we expect to achieve the complete finalization of the web interface to make sure that all features are available in this interface. And finally, remove the possibility to use the classic interface. As Mark explained, we will make sure that all the users can use in a good way the web interface before we decide to abandon the classic interface. Some users were asking today during the webinar whether there is already a possibility to use the web interface. And the answer is yes. Already since Euclid 6.3, you have the possibility to use either the classic or the web interface on your existing database. And this is still possible in Euclid 6.4. There was a question also about KSAR compatibility. Currently, KSAR 3.4 is available, and this time it's also compatible with Euclid 6.4. So if you upgrade to the latest version of Euclid, you will still be able to use KSAR 3.4 and communicate between these two tools. There are only some small limitations that are really not impacting the assessment. You will find more information on the KSAR and the Euclid website, but the compatibility is ensured between these two versions. There is a plan to update KSAR in November, later this month, to version 3.5, and 3.5 will also be compatible with Euclid 6.4. So you don't have to wait. If you are a KSAR user, you can already upgrade to the latest version of Euclid. So thanks again for posting these questions on LinkedIn. And I will go through now other questions we received during this webinar. First, about the migration and compatibility. There was a question about which versions of Euclid can be upgraded to Euclid 6.4. It's all the version of Euclid 6, and Euclid 5.6 can also be upgraded directly to Euclid 6.4 using the updater tool that is published on the Euclid website. So using the updater, you don't have to do the upgrade in sequence. The latest updater of Euclid 6.4 will migrate any Euclid 6 version to the latest format and the latest user interface as well. There was a question about exchanging data. So as I said earlier in this webinar, it's really important to make sure that you use at least Euclid 6.3 or Euclid 6.4 to prevent any issues in communicating Euclid files between users. Some questions concerning the web interface. Why are we planning to phase out the classic interface? The main reason is that it's the technology on which it is based is becoming obsolete, and we have also some issues supporting the classic interface in the future. So we are moving to a more modern technology, the web interface, and also for reasons of resources, we cannot continue to maintain two user interfaces in the future, and that's why we introduce all the new features only in the web interface, while keeping maintaining the classic interface until all the features are available in the new interface. One question about the use of the web interface and the classic interface at the same time. It's possible. It's only the two different interfaces, but in the background, they all connect to the same database. So you can, and we encourage you to start using today already the web interface. And if you face a limitation or an issue, you can always come back to the classic interface and continue your changes. If you face a limitation or an issue, please contact us, and we will have to make sure that these issues are addressed in the future releases of Euclid, either in April next year or in October. There is also sometimes a confusion between the web interface and the cloud services. Since last year, we have the same Euclid application in all the distributions we offer, in the desktop, the server, and the cloud version. So in all these distributions of Euclid, you have access exactly to the same product, and you have access to the web interface and the classic interface. So if you want to use the web interface, you don't have to subscribe to the cloud services. You can also do that with the desktop version and the server version that you deploy locally to your users. There was a question about concerning the list of features that are currently not available in the web interface. Mark Roberts, my colleague, already mentioned our plans for next year in terms of development, and this plan is going to be published on the Euclid website after this webinar to give you an overview of what we intend to implement next year on the web interface to fill the gap between what you have in the classic and not in the web interface yet. I'll move on to another topic, the validation assistant and nanomaterials. There was a question on whether it's mandatory to use version 6.4 to submit dossier to ECHA if you don't include information on nanomaterials. No, you can still use previous versions of Euclid, but if you have nanoforms, then the submission should be prepared. Submissions to ECHA should be prepared with Euclid 6.4. There was also a question on the time that it will take to include nano requirements in dossiers. The adaptations to REACH and Axis is entering into force in January next year. So if you, starting from last week, if you send information on nanomaterials to ECHA, they have to contain all the information requirements. And this will be also mandatory from January next year. If it takes some time for you to update to Euclid 6.4, you can always create a Euclid instance in the cloud to have access to the latest version and prepare your update containing nano information. We have more information on the changes to the technical completeness check in the manual that is available on the ECHA website on how to prepare registration and PPORT dossiers. Moving to another topic, the report generator. One webinar participant was looking at the list of report templates that we publish on the Euclid website and asking whether they would all be included in Euclid. Most of them are already included in Euclid 6.4. And when it's not the case, then this is specifically mentioned in this report generator page. But most of the latest reports that can be generated are already embedded in the latest version of Euclid. Now, one question related to the Waste Framework Directive database, whether there will be time for users to test the system or to have access to it before it becomes mandatory. The submission obligations will enter into force, will start to be mandatory in January 2021, and we will release a prototype early next year. So there will be some time for users to have access to the system and prepare before the submission is made mandatory. One question concerning the format. There was an update on the Poison Center's website that the format was updated to a new version. And this is to confirm that this version corresponds to the version of the Euclid 6.4 format. So if you have Euclid 6.4, then it's compatible with the latest Poison Center's notification format. Some questions on the cloud services. Is there still a limitation in storage space on the cloud, and how much is it? There is still a storage space limitation. It's 1 gigabyte for the standard Euclid cloud service. And we have also a trial service where the limit is 100 megabytes. There was a question about the future of the cloud, whether in the future we would provide Euclid only in the cloud services. This is not the case. All the distributions of Euclid, the desktop, the server, and the cloud, will remain in the future. Finally, there was a question also on the Euclid feature, the template that my colleague Mark presented. Whether this was limited to the reuse of study summaries for Euclid section 4 to 7, or whether it was covering use information, for example, or other Euclid sections. And this is to confirm that in the same way as for the classic interface, the template functionality covers all Euclid sections. So you can also use the templates for sharing or reusing use information, for example. Okay, I think that's all for the frequently asked questions. Before closing this webinar, I wanted to indicate again that you can still continue to post your questions in the next minutes, and you will find all the answers later on, maybe early next week, on the Euclid website. I wanted also to inform you about the existence of a new Euclid web page on the Euclid website, which is dedicated to the new web interface. So if you want to learn how to use the new interface, you can go to this page and you have all the information you need to know and access to a series of video tutorials that are highlighting the main things you need to know in order to use this web interface. And again, we encourage you to already switch to this web interface and try it and inform us in case you see or observe limitations. We have video tutorials on the web interface, and they are available on our YouTube Euclid video tutorials playlist. The latest one was created to introduce you to the latest changes in Euclid 6.4.2 that was released last week. So you can have a look to this these 7-minute video tutorials to have a demo of the new features. Finally, I wanted also to invite you to the next Euclid 6 related webinar, one on the specific revised REACH information requirements for nanoforms. It's on the 12th of November next week, and you can register online for this webinar. There is also on the same day a SCIP workshop that can be watched live during the day, and you have more information available on these links here. I would like to close this webinar now by thanking Mark Roberts for the presentation and also all the panelists for answering the question. And I would like also to thank all the participants and for all the questions you sent to us. We will make sure that we will prepare answers and publish them on the website. And you will receive a notification from the Euclid 6 website as soon as all this material is available. Thanks again, and see you next time.